will do my best. Can y'all hear me? Hear me now? Oh, there it is. We'll see if we can get this thing to behave as it often does not want to. Well, here we are again. If it does that much more, we're not going to do this. Let's see if that helps. So, nope. See you later. Won't walk around all night long. We'll just use this mic right here, Grant. Thank you very much. Technology doesn't like me, and I'm not a huge fan of it. So now we can get along together and move on. Very thankful to be able to come up here and do this again. I don't know if the elders just needed a spot filled or if they thought enough of me to ask me to do this, but either way, here I am and happy to be here. I love the summer series. Absolutely love it. I think it's a great thing that the eldership does here. I think it's a fantastic way for us to hear other preachers that are around, and I'm not so sure that I don't enjoy it even more when we do it in-house. I'm not sure if we realize just how much of a blessing it is to have men that are capable to get up here and speak from the pulpit. We have churches or congregations in our brotherhood that can't find full-time preachers. Can't get them. Have to hunt and peck and beat the bushes to find preachers to stand in when theirs go on vacation. And we've filled an entire, almost, summer series lineup for the entire summer based off of men that sit in these pews every weekend. Now, I realize we're talking about humility tonight, and I'm not trying to get overly prideful and brag and beat my chest, but that's a big deal, y'all. We spend a lot of time talking about the song leaders that we have here, but we've got some men here that can speak. And that's outside of Ashley and Ronnie and Ryan, the folks that do most of the ministering here in the first place. There's several guys here that are capable, and not to just get up here and fill in a spot either, to deliver a very meaningful lesson. And that's a big thing. It's something to definitely be proud of and definitely something to be appreciative of. And I don't know that we always recognize that totally. But anyway, back to the summer series. Very thankful to be able to be here. We've missed the first two. We were out of town one week, and I believe we were at camp with Peyton last week. And I didn't like missing either one of those because I wanted to hear them both. And believe you me, my best friend back there in the corner let me know how displeased he was that I was not here to hear his lesson. Well, I went back and watched it anyway, so there you go. You're welcome, sir. Ryan, thank you for the kind words. If I'd known you were going to go that far on a 20, I definitely would have given you 30, maybe even 50, just to see what else you would have said. But thank you nonetheless. You're well appreciated as also, my friend. Tonight, continuing with our series for the summer that we're doing, talking about letting this mind be in you from Philippians 2, verse 5, talking about the mind of Christ being in us. Tonight, we're going to talk about humility. And these first two verses, Philippians 2, 7 through 8, if you didn't know anything about the word humility, if you didn't have a single solitary clue, if you didn't know how to define it, you could make a definition from those two verses perfectly. But emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. There's a sermon in those two verses. You could sit here and talk for 45 minutes and make 3 or 4 points out of those two verses. You have, but emptied himself to start that verse off. So there's selflessness. So humility must contain a component of selflessness. You have being in the form of a servant. So humility must contain some form of servitude, some form of serving. In the second verse, you have being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient. So humility must contain a component of obedience in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Perhaps one of my favorite lessons that Todd did during our meeting was talking about what Christ left when he left heaven. How much he left behind when he left. And that level of humbling yourself to come down here and be a man in the form of a servant and not only dying, it's not like Christ died in his sleep. He died on the cross, which at the time, and I don't know that anybody's lining up to be crucified today, is one of the most painful, if not the most painful ways to die. There's a lot of humility in our Lord and Savior, and those two verses personify it perhaps better than any other, but there are several more examples. You guys know me and my history. If you don't by now, you're about to. I'm a huge history buff. It works its way into almost every lesson that I do. Bless the kids' hearts that are in the classes that we teach. It works their way into multiple ways into there. But I love World War II, and I found this quote from Mr. Winston Churchill. If you're not familiar with Mr. Churchill, he was Prime Minister of Britain during World War II, and he is almost as quotable as Ben Franklin. He's got several of these. You're looking for something for your bulletin board, for your classrooms, at school, or just looking something to inspire your morning that's not, biblical related. Obviously, his quotes don't ascend to that height, but this is a pretty good quote, and it sums up humility almost perfectly. When giving an interview after World War II, Mr. Churchill said, "I was not the lion, but it fell to me to give the lion's roar." We as Christians are not the lion. God's the lion. But oftentimes, it falls to us to give the lion's roar. It's a pretty neat quote. I thought it was anyway. I enjoyed it. It made a lot of sense to me. One of my favorite things that I've ever been able to be a part of here at Adamsville took place right back there in that back classroom every Wednesday night for the better part of, probably 2 years. It's what we called the young adults class, and I don't know how we got young adults out of it because it ranged everywhere from fresh into college to all the way up to mine and Ashley's age, and sometimes you'd have other people that would come in there. But one of my favorite parts of that class, aside from having so many different minds in there, so many different people that were willing to share their thoughts and willing to share their feelings and they're willing to speak on things, was a lesson that we did from a book that was a devotional book. It was called the One Word Study. And what that book did was it took a word and it broke it into 5 different devotional lessons. And we took those lessons on a Wednesday night and we made a class out of it. And the class often started with me asking people in the room, what does this word mean to you? So I'll do the same thing tonight. I will ask you, what does this word mean to you? And if you feel like saying it out loud, you are more than welcome to do so. That's fine. You don't have to. You can think it in your head. You're more than welcome to say it if you want to. So if I asked you, those letters are really small, y'all. I'm sorry. I made a PowerPoint so I wouldn't have to stand up here with my glasses on. Shameless plug. I have them. They're right here in case I need to read my notes. But I made the PowerPoint as a whole so I didn't have to stand up here with my glasses on. Although Ryan was very nice and said he would wear his if I wore mine. Anyway, those letters are very small. I'll read them all to you. We're going to skip the first definition and we're going to go to number 2. But if I was to ask you, you guys want to do this? If I was to ask you what humility means to you, what would you say? Nobody? Okay. So we're going to read the second definition here. The state or character of being humble, freedom from pride and arrogance, lowliness of mind, a low estimate of oneself or self-abasement. And that definition alone flies in the face of a lot of things that society would tell you is what you ought to be seeking today. You're supposed to have high self-esteem. You're supposed to be prideful. You're supposed to, if you got it, flaunt it. Brag about it. That's what the world wants us to do, right? That's not what humility is all about. And that's not what a mind of humility is about, and that's not the mind that's in Christ. Take a look at definition number 3, an act of submission. Well, there's a big one that society's big on now, right? We're all about the submitting, aren't we? And what you see on your news channels, and what you see in your social media feeds, you see a whole lot of people out there submitting, right? Not to law enforcement, not to God, not to one another. Society's not big on humility right now, y'all. And I didn't read the first answer, the first definition up there, because I live with an Andrew. I don't know if y'all knew that or not, but I live with an Andrew. And if you ever seek to define a word by using a word that's part of the word, that's not good enough. I know those of you that have had the pleasure of having Andrew in your class knows he loves his questions. All 5,946 of them. But it's okay, buddy. I got you. Look. Marked by meekness or modesty in behavior. By what? By meekness or modesty in behavior. Attitude or spirit, not arrogant or prideful. Showing differential or submissive respect. Low in rank, quality or station. Unpretentious or lowly. Sound like folks that you see out and about around you today? For the most part? Doesn't really, does it? It's an interesting thing. Those two definitions feed off each other. Well, tonight we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some things that humility is and some things that it's not, or what it's equal to and what it's not. Humility is equal to submission, but submission is not equal to crawling. Submission is not equal to groveling. In 1 Peter 6, or 5 and 6, it says, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Anybody in this room that wouldn't like a little bit more grace in their life from the Lord? I'm pretty sure that applies to all of us. Be subject to your elders. Submit to your elders. Submit to one another. But why? Where's the benefit in the submitting? Where's the benefit in seeking the lower place? Well, accept correction. It allows you to accept correction. It allows you to follow leadership. It allows you to exhort one another when you submit to one another. You see, if we're all seeking the number one spot, all of us aren't going to get there. Now, before we go any further, here's my disclaimer. Just like I disclaimed about my PowerPoint abilities, I'm going to disclaim about this. Don't go out of here saying that ugly bald man said that it's okay for you to not have pride in yourself, and it's not okay, and it's okay for you to not seek and do your best. That is not what we're talking about here tonight. That is not. I absolutely want you to take pride in your appearance. I actually absolutely want you to seek the best job you can have, to be the best at your career, to be the best in your field, to be the best Christian you can be. That's not what humility is about. And that's not what submitting to your elders and submitting to one another is about. It's about getting to a common goal. It's about not seeking the preeminence. It's about seeking unity, teamwork. That's what submitting does in the long run for us as Christians. 1 Corinthians 7:3 proves that even though we're submitting, that we don't submit to everything. We submit to God. We submit to other Christians. We don't submit to man and man's laws. 1 Corinthians 7:23, you were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants, slaves, of men. All these verses, in case you're wondering, will come from the ESV tonight. I should have said that earlier. I love the ESV just for my general reading. It's one of my favorites. I always cross-reference everything with the King James, but I love the ESV. It's just plain. It's easy to read. But we're not supposed to be slaves of men. We're not supposed to submit to man in man's ways. Galatians 1:10, having Paul talks, says, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, wait for it, I would not be a servant of Christ. Remember your definitions from earlier? Part of being humble, part of having humility is being able to serve. If we're servants of Christ, we submit to Christ. We don't submit to man. Humility does not equal passive or weak. Humility teaches us to seek and be meek in our lives. And the world wants to tell us a lot of times that meekness equals weakness. Well, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4:21, I can do it both ways. He says, what do you wish? Shall I come to you with a rod or with love and a spirit of gentleness? We're not to be spineless as Christians. Having humility does not mean that we don't have a spine. Having humility does not mean we don't stand up for what's right and for what we believe in. Romans 1:16, and I skipped one on purpose, says, do not be ashamed, or Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Why? Because it is the what? The power unto salvation. Power. Power is not weak. Power is strong. There's power in the gospel. There's power in being humble, in having humility. Romans 12:11, do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit. Be fervent in spirit. Be zealous. Serve the Lord. Just because we're meek, just because we seek the lower level or seek to be on the lower level, not in the preeminent places, doesn't mean that we're weak. It doesn't mean that we're bowing down. It doesn't mean that we're cowering. Acts 4:13, why is this important? Acts 4:13, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and they perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished. Why were they astonished? They were able to see and recognize that they had been with Jesus. If we are humble and we display humility, people will be able to see that we also have spent time with Jesus, albeit through his word. But they will also be able to see Christ in us. Being humble does not make you weak. Being humble does not mean you have to be passive. Displaying humility as a Christian does not mean we cower or back down from opposition. Furthermore, we should actually be able to stand our ground and defend the gospel and display the proper relationship that we have with Christ. Humility is not a bad thing for us to have when it comes to dealing with other people. Humility is also not a bad thing to have when it comes to our talents. Everybody got talents, right? Some shape, form, or fashion. You got some somewhere. Fruit baskets, security team, song leading, speaking, not me, teaching a class, cleaning the building, cutting the grass. All those are talents, and all those affect somebody. But why do talents matter? Where do talents play a role in humility? Romans 12:3, for by grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. 1 Peter 4:10 and 11, as each has received a gift, talent, use it to serve one another. There's where talents have a place in humility. We use them to serve one another. All these guys that get up here and lead singing on Sunday mornings before worship or as part of worship, you make my worship better. I don't know that you know you do that, but you do. You make my worship better, and therefore you are using your talents to serve me. And you are helping me to serve God in that right. Use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified. Why do we serve one another? Why is that area of servitude in there? Because when we serve one another, it glorifies God. When we serve to help other people outside the walls of our congregation, it glorifies God. It brings other people to God. That serving component of humility is irreplaceable. It gets us out there in front of people, and it helps us to become what the Lord needs us to be. You can serve someone, never open your mouth, and be a demonstrator of the gospel to somebody. Coin's got a flip side to it also, though. Using our talents humbly to serve one another and promote the church are also two examples that Christ has demonstrated for us. Still talking about talents. Using talents well involves using them in a proper manner. A mind of humility seeks to promote the church as a whole, never the individual. The church is a we organization, not a me organization. There's only one me in the church, and that's God himself. There's only one me. We have to serve we and make ourselves better by leaning on one another. Using our talents to help serve one another is a fantastic way to do that. Proverbs 25:6-7 warns us about trying to put ourselves forward into the place of the great. For it's better to be told to come up here than to put yourself into that location. Proverbs 16:18-19 warns us that pride gets in the way and comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit comes before a fall. It is better to be lowly, of lowly spirit with the poor, than to divide the spoil with the proud. Of what spirit? Of lowly spirit. It's part of humility. It's part of having a mindset of humility. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:10, I worked harder than any of them. I outworked them all. Did more than all of them. There's always one of those people in every congregation that just outworks everybody. That just smokes them all. I mean, just you can't outwork them. It doesn't matter what you do. Not that you should be trying to outwork them. You should be trying to work. You should probably try to work with them. But they just work. That's just what they do. You don't have to tell them what to do because they find things to do. But to finish that verse, Paul says, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Paul says, I outworked them all. It wasn't me doing it. It was by the grace of God and for the glory of God that I was able to do the things that I was able to do. Even Christ himself bowed his head, got on his knees, and washed his disciples' feet to display how humble, just how humble you could be. And this is the Son of God who left all in heaven to come to earth and be a servant and be a human just like the rest of us. I have two more slides for you tonight. Humility equal being able to survive failure. There are very few certainties in your life, and I meant to kick Ronnie Hayes in the shin Sunday morning because he hit right on top of this, and I'm going to hit it again. And I'll just thank him for opening the door. There are very few certainties in life. Down here around April 15th, every year, we like to say there's two certainties. There's death and there's taxes. Well, there's death in jail if you don't pay your taxes, so there you go. There's another one. But death is one certainty that's going to find everybody. But another certainty that will seek you out no matter what you do, no matter where you go, no matter what situation you find yourself in your life, you're going to fail sooner or later. You're going to fail. You're going to drop a pass. You're going to bomb a test. You're going to bomb a job interview and not get the job. You're going to, let's see. Oh, wait, just yesterday. You're going to miss an IV on a patient. And in case y'all don't know, you can't start an IV on somebody without hurting them in the first place. So when you have to stick them again, that's twice. It's part of it. It's breaking eggs to make omelets, so to speak. But you're going to fail. Doesn't matter what you do, you're going to fail. You ask, at some point in time, it's coming. Maybe before you get home, you might fail at something. I don't know. I'm sure it happens a lot. You ask any successful coach, you ask any successful business person, probably ask any successful Christian that's been a soul winner, that's baptized a lot of people. Ask them if they remember the people that they baptized, or ask them if they remember the ones that they couldn't get. Ask the coaches if they remember the games they won or the games that they lost. Ask the businessmen, is it the ventures that were really successful that made you as successful as you are? Or was it the ones that didn't work that helped you hone and craft what you're now doing? You see, we don't ever learn how to get back up as long as we're standing on our own 2 feet. That's the wonderful thing about failure. If we allow it to, it's the greatest teacher that we'll ever know. It shows us where we came up short, and it shows us where we need to get better. But you'll never realize that if you don't have humility. Our brother James tells us in James 4, 6 through 8, submit. There's that word again. That submit word. There it is. It just keeps popping up. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Drop down one verse to James 4, verse 10. We used to have little fellas come down here and sing that song, sometimes twice a night on Wednesday night. Haven't heard it in a while. But we used to sing it, and I heard it at camp. I think either Andrew's week or Peyton's week. I can't remember. Peyton's week? It was last week. Okay. Hadn't heard it in a long time. And they sung it, and I was like, that goes in my lesson. That'll fit right there. Right there. It'll fit right there. And here it is. And right there it is. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will exalt you. So says the King James, or the ESV. King James says, lift you up. If you don't humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, he can't lift you up. If you're not humble in your failures and you don't look and say, I sinned, I messed up, God's showing me where I need to get better. Can't fix it. He can't help you fix it because you won't allow him to. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Anybody that's ever been in any of my classes knows just how much I love Peter in the New Testament. Why? Because Peter can step in it really good and still come out great on the other side because he doesn't stay a failure. He doesn't take his failures laying down. What you want to know about Peter? Peter cut off a man's ear with a sword because he had a bad temper. Peter jumped out of the boat and then lost his faith and started to sink into the water. But everybody forgets that Peter was the one that got out of the boat in the first place. Nobody else got out of the boat. Peter jumped out of the boat to go to the Lord. Nobody else did. But he failed. But when he failed, he knew where to call out to. And the Lord helped him out of the water. Peter also denied his Lord. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I can only imagine what it felt like when their eyes met after the 3rd time. And I think that might have just done Nick in. I think I just might have died right there on the spot, melted into a pile of goo or a pile of dust and just been dead. Not Peter. Peter comes right back, rising from the ashes, thunderously on the day of Pentecost because he was humble enough to let his failures make him better. He had a mind of humility that allowed him to seek things that were bigger than himself for the common good of the church. And he stayed that way too, right up until he died, still preaching for the church, killed because of it. You know, we haven't done a whole lot of talking about the gospel tonight. We haven't done a whole lot of talking about what one needs to do to become a Christian. We have preached and talked about a lot of Bible tonight. So you have heard the word, Romans 10:17. Once you hear the word, the gospel is real funny about being able to prick your heart at just the right time. You study it enough, it'll eventually work its way in there. And when it does, it causes you to believe. John 8:24. Believing causes you to learn that you're lost and you're not where you ought to be, which causes you to repent. Upon repenting, Acts 17:30-31 leads you to a confession that Christ is actually the Son of God and that you want to follow him and give your life to him. And upon that confession, you're baptized, Mark 16:16, and you're made a new creature. And you live the rest of your life trying your level best to serve God and do what you can with as much humility and as much zeal as you can muster up. It's not easy. You're going to fail a lot. It's just part of it. Just because you fail a little bit or fail a lot doesn't mean you have to take it laying down. If you needed to become a Christian, Aaron, opportunity is between you and this baptistry behind me after you make that confession right down here in front of us. If you are a Christian and you've failed in some areas, make it right. Don't stay on your knees. Stop there long enough to ask forgiveness and then get back up. Be humble enough to say that I've sinned and I need to make some things right and get it right. If it's something that needs to be admitted publicly, we can pray with you. We can pray for you. That's what we're here for. If there's something you need to talk about that revolves around your salvation, have questions, we're here for that as well. There's people in this room from wall to wall that would be happy to talk to you about it if you have questions. But if you have a need at this particular time, I ask that you would come while we stand and while we sing.